Welcome to Sleeping Times. Imagine waking up at 2 in the morning in the absolute cold of a medieval winter, without heating, without electricity, without any modern comfort. Now imagine spending the entire day hunched over parchment made from animal skin, copying texts letter by letter with a goose quill, knowing that a single mistake could ruin months of work. And imagine doing this every day for decades, in near total silence, devoting your entire life to preserving knowledge that you may never know if anyone will ever read. That was the reality of medieval manuscript monks, the silent guardians who saved Western civilization from the darkness of oblivion. Without them, much of what we know about Greek philosophy, Roman history, and ancient science simply would not exist. They were the internet servers of the Middle Ages, but infinitely more dedicated. If you're enjoying this content, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell notification so you don't miss any of our relaxing stories. Oh, and don't forget to leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from and what time it is there. It's always amazing to see how our community is spread all over the world. Now, how about turning off the lights, finding a comfortable position, and getting ready to dive into the contemplative and surprisingly fascinating life of a day as a medieval manuscript monk? The darkness still completely dominates the monastery when the bell rings for the first time. It is 2 o'clock in the morning, or matins, as the monks call this sacred moment that precedes the very break of dawn. The metallic sound echoes through corridors of cold stone, penetrating the tiny cells where men sleep on straw, covered by a single, rough, woolen blanket. There is no heating, there is no comfort, only the commitment to a routine that has repeated for centuries, as unchanging as the monastery stones themselves. Have you ever stopped to think how long you could live without your digital alarm clock, without the electric light that turns on instantly, without the central heating that keeps your home at a constant temperature? Medieval manuscript monks had no choice. They woke in absolute cold, sometimes with ice forming on the small windows of their cells, and they had to get up immediately. There was no time to snuggle under the covers for 5 more minutes. The bell rang and you got up. It was that simple. The monk opens his eyes in near total darkness. Only a distant candle, kept burning in the hallway for safety reasons, offers a faint glow that barely crosses through the half-open door of his cell. He knows every centimetre of that tiny space, no more than 6.5 by 10 feet, a straw mat on the floor, a small wooden chest where he keeps his spare habit, his backup sandals, perhaps a rosary inherited from some family member, a crude wooden cross on the wall, nothing more. Poverty is not just a vow, it is a physical, tangible reality that permeates every aspect of monastic existence. He rises slowly, feeling the cold stone floor pierce through the soles of his bare feet. The habit he will wear is the same as yesterday. Monks own only 2, one to wear, while the other is washed once a week. The fabric is thick, made of undyed wool, in shades of brown or natural grey. It weighs on his shoulders, especially when damp, but it offers essential protection against the constant cold that inhabits the monastery corridors. He dresses it with automatic movements practiced thousands of times, tying the cord at his waist with 3 knots, each one representing one of the vows: poverty, chastity, and obedience. In the corridors, other silent figures move in the same direction. There are no conversations. The rule of silence is absolute during most of the day, and especially during these sacred hours of the early morning. Monks communicate only through coded gestures, a complex system of hand signals that allows basic messages to be transmitted without breaking the silence. It is fascinating to think that in an age where we send hundreds of digital messages a day, These men would spend entire weeks without speaking a single word aloud except during sung prayers. The monastery church is even colder than the cells. The high ceiling, necessary for the acoustics of Gregorian chants, also means that any heat generated by the bodies is quickly lost in the vast space above their heads. The stones of the walls seem to radiate cold, as if they had absorbed all the ice of winter and are now returning it slowly. The monks take their places on hard wooden benches without backrests where they will remain for the next 2 hours. There are no cushions. Physical discomfort is part of spiritual discipline. The chanting begins. Male voices rise in unison, following melodies that were composed centuries before, transmitted orally from generation to generation, before finally being recorded in primitive musical notation. Gregorian chant has no instrumental accompaniment, only human voices creating harmonies that echo through stone vaults. It is hypnotic, meditative, specifically designed to induce a state of deep contemplation. Each syllable is elongated, each word is savored. A single line of text can take minutes to be sung completely. Can you imagine starting your day like that? Without checking your phone, without having coffee, without even seeing the light of the sun. Just your voice joining dozens of others in a chant that echoes through the cold stone while your empty stomach complains silently and your numb feet barely feel the cold anymore. For manuscript monks, this was the beginning of every day. There were no weekends, there were no holidays, there were no days off. The routine was eternal, unchanging, comforting in its absolute predictability. After matins, there is a brief period of meditative silence. Some monks remain on their knees in private prayer. Others return briefly to their cells to gather the materials they will need for the day. But most proceed directly to the next commitment, Lauds, the second prayer of the day, which coincides with the first light of the horizon. It is during Lauds that finally, through the narrow windows of the church, the first grey rays of dawn begin to appear. Dawn in the Middle Ages was a much more significant event than it is today. Without electricity, natural light determined absolutely everything. Work began when there was enough light to see. Work ended when darkness made it impossible to continue. Manuscript monks, whose work required extreme visual precision, were especially dependent on natural light. A cloudy day meant fewer hours of work. A long winter meant months of reduced productivity. They could not simply turn on a lamp and continue working. Candles were too expensive and too dangerous for routine daytime use. When Lauds ends, the sky is already clear enough to distinguish shapes and colours. The monks head to the refectory for the first meal of the day, although meal is a generous term for what will be served. A piece of dark bread made from rye or barley, sometimes so hard it needs to be soaked in water to be chewed. A bowl of oatmeal porridge without sugar, without milk, just grains cooked in water. Perhaps a dried apple from the previous autumn, wrinkled but still edible. And water, always water. Wine is reserved for special occasions or for sick monks. They eat in absolute silence, while a designated monk reads aloud from a religious text. Reading during meals serves two purposes. It feeds the soul while the body is being fed, and it prevents unnecessary conversations that could break the discipline of silence. Monks learn to eat quickly, efficiently, without particular pleasure. Food is fuel, nothing more. Gluttony is one of the 7 deadly sins, and they are constantly reminded of this. After the meal, there is a moment of preparation. Monks who will work in the scriptorium, the manuscript copying room, gather their materials. Goose quills carefully cut and sharpened. Small pots of ink prepared the week before. Pumice stones to smooth the parchment. Sharp knives to scrape away errors. wooden rulers to keep lines straight. Each tool is precious, carefully maintained, sometimes used for decades. The sun is now completely above the horizon. The golden light of morning begins to penetrate the monastery's narrow windows. It is time to begin the work that defines the existence of these men, the work that will preserve the knowledge of humanity through the dark centuries to come. It is time to enter the scriptorium, and as they walk through the corridors toward that sacred room, each monk carries with him a silent question. What will be preserved today? What ancient words will be copied letter by letter, ensuring that they do not disappear into the darkness of oblivion? What knowledge will be passed on to generations yet to be born? The scriptorium door opens with a familiar creak of iron hinges. The room that reveals itself is, at the same time, impressive and austere. High ceilings with dark wooden beams, whitewashed stone walls to reflect as much light as possible. Large windows, surprisingly large for medieval architecture, strategically positioned to capture northern light, which is more constant and less prone to creating dramatic shadows throughout the day. The floor is cold stone, but meticulously clean. There cannot be dust here. Dust is the enemy of parchment, ink, precision. Along the walls, arranged at carefully calculated angles in relation to the windows, are the individual scriptoria, copyists' work tables. Each one is a piece of functional carpentry, an inclined surface to hold the parchment at the ideal angle, shelves for materials, a small bench without a backrest. Some wealthier monasteries possess desks with secret drawers for storing precious pigments, but most are simple, practical, designed for a single purpose, to facilitate hours and hours of meticulous work. Have you ever spent an entire day sitting in an uncomfortable chair, hunched over a table, doing manual work that requires absolute concentration? Now imagine doing that every day, for years, decades even, without breaks to check social media, without music in your earbuds, without the possibility of getting up and making a coffee when concentration begins to fail. Manuscript monks lived this as a daily reality. And yet, they produced works of beauty and precision that leave us amazed 800 years later. The master of the scriptorium, usually the most experienced and skilled monk, is already in his place when the others enter. He is responsible for assigning tasks, distributing materials, checking the quality of work, and maintaining discipline. In some monasteries, he is also responsible for preparing the models that less experienced copyists will follow. His gaze sweeps across the room as each monk takes his designated place. No words are exchanged. A nod of the head, a gesture with the hand. Everything is communicated in silence. The morning light now enters fully through the windows. It is the best light of the day, clear, strong, but not excessively bright. The monks will take advantage of these precious hours to the fullest. Each one carefully retrieves the manuscript on which he was working the day before. Some are copying religious texts, Bibles, prayer books, lives of saints. Others work on classical texts, works of Aristotle, Plato, Cicero, preserving the knowledge of the ancient world. A few, the most talented, work on illuminated manuscripts where the text will be decorated with elaborate illustrations, ornate capital letters, flowering borders in gold and vibrant colors. The parchment on which they work is, in itself, a marvel of craftsmanship. Made from sheep, goat, or calf skin, each sheet went through a preparation process that took weeks. The skin was soaked in lime to remove hair and fat. It was stretched on a wooden frame and scraped repeatedly with curved knives until it was as thin as paper, but incredibly durable. It was polished with pumice stone until smooth as silk. A single book of medium size could require the skins of a dozen animals. A large manuscript, like a complete Bible, could require 200 skins or more. Think about the cost of this. In an era where every animal had immense value, providing meat, milk, wool, labor, dedicating 200 calf skins to create a single book was an extraordinary investment. It was a statement that knowledge, the written word, was worth more than any physical commodity. Medieval monasteries understood something that our digital age sometimes forgets. Preserving knowledge has a real cost, requires real resources, demands real sacrifice. The monk dips his quill in the ink. The ink itself is a complex recipe, perfected over centuries. The most common is ferragalic ink made from oak galls, those strange excrescences that appear on leaves when certain insects deposit eggs. The galls are crushed and soaked in water with iron sulfate and gum arabic. The result is a dark brown ink that darkens to black as it dries and, crucially, penetrates the fibers of the parchment, making it almost impossible to erase completely. This permanence is essential. These texts need to last not just for years, but for centuries. The quill touches the parchment, the first stroke of the day. A perfectly straight vertical line, which will form part of a letter. The movement is controlled, precise, the result of years of practice. Medieval calligraphy is not simply writing. It is an art form. There are different styles, uncial, with its rounded and majestic letters. Carolingian, developed during the reign of Charlemagne, more compact and legible. Gothic, angular, and dramatic, which will dominate the later centuries. Each style has its rules, its specific proportions, its characteristic flourishes. The work is slow, incredibly slow by modern standards. A skilled copyist can produce perhaps 3 or 4 pages per day. A manuscript of medium size can take months to complete. A complete Bible can take years, sometimes a decade or more if elaborate illuminations are included. And throughout all this time, the monk must maintain absolute concentration. One moment of distraction, and a letter can be misformed. A drop of ink can smudge. A line can become crooked. There is something profoundly meditative about this work. The repetitive movement of the hand, the intense focus required, the absolute silence of the room, broken only by the occasional scrape of quill on parchment, the soft rustling of a page being turned, the almost inaudible sigh of a monk adjusting his posture. In our era of constant multitasking, where we divide attention between multiple screens and multiple conversations simultaneously, there is something almost alien about this level of singular concentration. But the work is also physically brutal. The posture, hunched over the table, causes back pain that becomes chronic. The constant strain on the eyes, forcing them to focus on minute details under natural light that varies throughout the day, causes frequent headaches and eventually deterioration of vision. The hands develop specific calluses where the quill presses against the fingers. In winter, the fingers become so cold they lose sensitivity, making the work even more difficult. Some manuscripts preserve marginal notes from copyists complaining about the cold. My hand is numb. The parchment is hard as stone. Let whoever does not know what it is to write think that it is not labor. These marginal notes, called colophons when they appear at the end of a manuscript, are fascinating windows into the humanity of these men. They were not copying machines. They were people with frustrations, pains, moments of humor. Some left small jokes. Others drew playful cats in the margins. There is a surprising number of cats in medieval manuscripts. Some expressed profound relief upon finishing a particularly difficult work. Thank God it's finished. Just as the traveler rejoices to see his home, so the scribe rejoices to see the last page. As the morning advances, the light changes. What began as soft gold becomes brilliant white. The monks adjust their positions subtly, always seeking the ideal angle where the light illuminates the parchment without creating reflections that strain the eyes. There are no lamps to adjust. There are no blinds to control the intensity. They work with what nature offers, constantly adapting to changing conditions. And then when the sun is high in the sky, when the light is strongest and the work is flowing, the bell rings again. It is time for terce, the third prayer of the day. Work stops immediately. Quills are cleaned and set aside. Ink pots are carefully capped. The monks stand, some with difficulty, muscles stiff from hours in the same position, and head to the church. But before leaving, each monk takes one last look at his work. How many lines have been completed? How many words have been preserved? How much closer is he to the completion of this manuscript, this mission to preserve knowledge for the future? The church is warmer now than it was during the early morning matins, but only marginally. The midday sun penetrates the coloured glass windows, a luxury that only the wealthiest monasteries possess, creating patterns of red, blue, and golden light on the stone floor. The monks take their places for terce, the prayer of the third hour, which marks approximately 9 o'clock in the morning in the medieval time system. This system, based on canonical hours, divides the day not into 24 equal hours, but into periods defined by prayers, matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and compline. Have you ever stopped to think what it would be like to live without clocks, without being able to check the exact time at any moment? Medieval monks did not have that modern anxiety of being on time in the sense we understand. They had something different. A natural rhythm dictated by the sun, the seasons, the monastery bells. Time was more fluid, more organic. An hour in summer, when days were long, was literally longer than an hour in winter. Time expanded and contracted with the seasons. Terce is briefer than matins, only 15 or 20 minutes of chanting and prayer. But it is essential. It interrupts the work, forces a pause, reorients the mind toward the spiritual purpose that is supposedly supposed to motivate all physical effort. It is easy, when immersed in repetitive manual work, to forget the why. Regular prayers serve as constant reminders. You are not just copying words, you are serving God, preserving His word, fulfilling a sacred purpose. After terce, the monks return to the scriptorium. But now there is a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The early morning, with its perfect light and renewed energy after the night, has passed. Midday approaches, bringing with it the most intense light and, in summer, heat. The scriptorium, with its large windows designed to capture maximum light, can become suffocatingly hot in the summer months. The monks sweat beneath their heavy wool habits, but they cannot remove them. Modesty and uniformity are absolute. The work continues, line after line, word after word. Some manuscripts being copied are texts the monk knows by heart. Biblical passages he has recited thousands of times, prayers that permeate his daily life. These are, in a way, easier. Familiarity allows the hand to work almost automatically, while the mind can meditate, pray, contemplate. But other texts are unfamiliar, sometimes in Latin, so archaic or corrupted that it barely makes sense. The monk copies faithfully even what he does not understand, trusting that the meaning will be preserved for someone, somewhere, at some future time who can understand. Here is something fascinating. Many of the classical texts we have today, works of Greek philosophy, Roman history, ancient science, survived only because medieval monks copied them, often without necessarily understanding or agreeing with their content. Devout Christian monks preserved pagan texts, sometimes with evident disapproval in their marginal notes, but they preserved them anyway. Why? because they understood at some profound level that knowledge has intrinsic value, that destroying knowledge, even knowledge with which you disagree, is a sin against humanity. Compare this to our digital age, where information can be deleted instantly, where entire platforms can disappear, taking with them years of content, where the memory of the internet is much more fragile than we imagine. Medieval monks working with durable physical materials created records that survived 800 years. How many of our emails, social media posts, digital documents will survive 800 years? How many will survive 80? The bell rings again. It is sext, the prayer of midday. The monks stand, put away their materials, and head to the church. After sext, there is finally the main meal of the day, although main is relative. In the refectory, each monk receives a bowl of vegetable soup, thick with barley or peas, a piece of hard cheese, more bread, perhaps some salted fish if it is a feast day or if the monastery is near the sea. Meat is forbidden on most days. The Benedictine rule allows meat only for the sick. They eat quickly, in silence, while the reading continues. Today is a passage from a saint's life, the story of Saint Jerome, appropriately, the patron saint of translators and scribes. Saint Jerome, who in the 4th century spent decades translating the Bible into Latin, creating the Vulgate that became the standard text of the Catholic Church. Saint Jerome, who wrote about the difficulties of translation, about how each language has its own nuances, how meaning can be lost or transformed in the passage from one language to another. Manuscript monks feel a special connection to Saint Jerome. They too struggle with texts, with meanings, with the overwhelming responsibility of transmitting words with absolute precision. A copying error can propagate through generations. If you copy a manuscript with an error, and someone copies your copy, and someone copies that copy, the error multiplies, spreads, potentially corrupts the text forever. The pressure to be perfect is immense. After the meal, there is a brief period of rest and perhaps 30 minutes where monks can walk through the cloister, the monastery's inner garden, or simply sit in silence. Some return to their cells for a moment of private prayer. Others go to the monastery library, that sacred room where completed manuscripts are kept on shelves or in special chests, protected from light, moisture, rats, and insects. The library of a great medieval monastery is a treasure beyond any material wealth. Some possess hundreds of volumes, an impressive collection for the time. Each book represents years of work, immense resources, irreplaceable knowledge. The books are chained to the shelves to prevent theft, not because the monks do not trust one another, but because a single manuscript is worth more than the annual income of an entire farm. Books are stolen, books are sold on the black market, books disappear. There are records of monasteries that maintained detailed catalogues of their libraries, listing each volume with careful descriptions. Some of these catalogues survived, and they are heartbreaking. They list books that no longer exist, knowledge that was lost, works by ancient authors that we know existed only because a medieval catalogue mentions them, but whose text disappeared completely. Imagine knowing that something existed, that it was preserved for centuries, but that at some point, perhaps in a fire, perhaps during an invasion, perhaps simply through neglect, it was lost forever. The rest period ends. The monks return to the scriptorium for the afternoon session. The light now comes from a different angle. What worked perfectly in the morning now creates inconvenient shadows. The monks adjust their positions, move their tables slightly if possible, adapt. Always adapting, always working with the conditions they have, not the conditions they would like to have. The afternoon is, in many ways, more difficult than the morning. The body is tired, the eyes are fatigued. The novelty of the day has passed. It is when discipline really matters, when commitment to the work is tested. Anyone can work well when rested and motivated. But continuing to work when every muscle aches, when the eyes burn, when the mind wants to be anywhere else except hunched over a parchment, that requires something deeper. And yet they continue. Quill to parchment, ink flowing, letters forming, words accumulating, knowledge being preserved one line at a time. But how much longer will this light last? How much more work can be done before darkness makes it impossible to continue? In a special corner of the scriptorium, slightly separated from the tables of common copyists, works a different kind of monk. He is not simply copying text, he is creating art. He is an illuminator, an artist specialized in decorating manuscripts with elaborate illustrations, ornate capital letters, flowering borders, and, most precious of all, gold leaf details that literally make the pages shine when light touches them. This is why they are called illuminations. They illuminate, they shine, they transform a page of text into something transcendent. The work of an illuminator is fundamentally different from the work of a copyist. While the copyist seeks uniformity, precision, invisibility, his calligraphy must be so consistent that it is impossible to tell where one day's work ended and another began. The illuminator seeks expression, creativity, visual impact. He is at once both artist and craftsman, creator and technician, and his work requires materials that are extraordinarily rare and expensive. Consider ultramarine blue, the most precious color available to medieval artists. It comes from lapis lazuli, a semi-precious stone found mainly in what is today Afghanistan. The stone must be mined, transported thousands of kilometers through dangerous trade routes, ground into fine powder, and then processed through a complex method that separates the pure blue pigment from impurities. The result is a blue powder so intense, so vibrant that it seems almost supernatural. And it is more expensive gram for gram than gold. Would you use something more expensive than gold to decorate a book? Medieval monasteries did exactly that, because certain books, special Bibles, evangeliaries used in important ceremonies, books of hours commissioned by kings, deserved the best that humanity could offer. These were not just books, they were statements of faith, demonstrations of devotion, offerings to God. Nothing was too expensive, no effort was excessive. The illuminator works with a palette of pigments arranged in small ceramic pots on his table. In addition to ultramarine, there is vermilion made from ground cinnabar, a toxic mercury mineral that produces a brilliant red. There is green made from malachite or, more commonly, from verdigris, the green patina that forms on copper exposed to vinegar. There is yellow made from saffron or from orpiment, another toxic mineral. There is white made from lead, black made from charcoal. Each color has its own recipe, its own properties, its own dangers. Because yes, many of these pigments are poisonous. Vermilion contains mercury, lead white is, obviously lead, verdigris is corrosive, orpiment contains arsenic. Medieval illuminators worked with these substances daily, without gloves, without masks, without any protection. They inhaled the powders, absorbed the heavy metals through their skin, occasionally even licked their brushes to create fine points. The health consequences were severe. Many illuminators developed tremors in their hands, respiratory problems, mental deterioration, symptoms that today we recognize as heavy metal poisoning. But they continued, because the art they created was considered more important than their own health. There was a genuine belief that suffering for the creation of something beautiful, for the glory of God, was in itself a form of prayer, a form of sacrifice that would be rewarded in the afterlife. It is difficult for modern minds to comprehend this level of devotion, this willingness to literally sacrifice health and life for art that most people would never see. The illuminator is working now on a capital letter, the first letter of a chapter which will be much larger than normal text and elaborately decorated. He has already drawn the basic outline with a pencil made from lead or silver. Now he is applying gold leaf, a process that requires extreme patience and absolutely steady hands. First he applies a layer of gesso, a mixture of gypsum, glue, and sometimes egg white, to the area where the gold will be placed. This layer must be perfectly smooth and slightly raised above the parchment surface. When the gesso is dry but still slightly sticky, he takes a sheet of gold leaf. Gold beaten so thin it is almost transparent, so delicate that a breath can make it fly away. He places it carefully over the gesso, pressing gently with a polished agate tool. The gold adheres to the gesso. The excess is carefully removed with a soft brush and saved. Every fragment is too precious to waste. Then he takes the agate tool and begins to polish the gold, pressing and rubbing until the surface becomes mirror-like, brilliant, almost liquid in its luminosity. The effect is magical. When light touches this golden letter, it seems to shine from within as if it had its own light. In a dark church, illuminated only by candles, a manuscript illuminated with gold literally glows, capturing and reflecting every fragment of light. It is easy to understand why medieval people, seeing this for the first time, could believe they were seeing something divine, something not entirely of this world. But gold is only the beginning. Now the illuminator adds colors around the letter. He works with incredibly fine brushes, some made of only 3 or 4 hairs from a marten or squirrel. He paints intertwining vines, stylized flowers, sometimes animals or human figures. Each stroke is deliberate, precise. There is no crowpluzide here. There is no way to undo a mistake. If he applies too much ink, if his hand trembles, if a pigment smudges, days of work can be ruined. Think about the pressure of this. You are working on a manuscript that already represents months or years of work by other monks. The parchment alone is worth a fortune. The text was copied with meticulous care, and now you need to add decoration that will be worthy of that investment, that will not ruin the work of everyone else. One mistake of yours can destroy the work of a dozen people. How would you not be paralyzed by this responsibility? And yet medieval illuminators created works of surprising beauty. They developed distinct regional styles. You can look at a manuscript and identify whether it was made in Ireland, France, Italy, based on the style of the illuminations. They constantly innovated, experimented with new techniques, new designs, new ways of using the limited space of the page. They hid small visual jokes in the margins, rabbits hunting hunters, monkeys imitating humans, impossible hybrid creatures that seem straight out of feverish dreams. There is something profoundly human in these decorated margins. The main texts are serious, religious, important, but in the margins, artists allowed themselves to play, to express humor, perhaps even subtly subvert social hierarchies. A bishop portrayed as a donkey, a king shown fleeing from a rabbit. These images suggest that even in a rigidly hierarchical society, even in a strict religious context, there was room for irreverence, for questioning, for laughter. The work of illumination is slow, much slower than copying text. A skilled illuminator can spend days on a single, elaborately decorated page, weeks on a particularly complex page. The most elaborate manuscripts, such as the Book of Kells, created by Irish monks in the 9th century, represent decades of work by multiple artists. Each page is a masterpiece. The entire book is a testament to what humans can create when they dedicate their entire lives to a single purpose. But why? Why invest so much time, so much effort, so many precious resources in decorating books? Part of the answer is religious, creating beauty for God. But there is something more. There is a recognition that the way information is presented matters. That beautiful text is more likely to be read, more likely to be preserved, more likely to be valued. Medieval illuminators understood something about human psychology that is still true today. We respond to beauty. We value what is visually attractive. The afternoon light is beginning to change again, becoming more golden, more soft. The illuminator knows he has only 1 or 2 more hours of good light. He works with intensified focus, taking advantage of every minute. Each brush stroke counts. Each moment of light is precious. And as he works, he carries a question. This beauty I am creating, this art that is consuming my health and my years, will it be appreciated? Will someone, somewhere, at some future time, look at this page and feel a fraction of the devotion I have poured into it? Autumn arrived at the monastery almost imperceptibly. A gradual shift in the quality of light, an increasing chill in the morning air, the trees in the orchard slowly transforming their leaves from green to gold and red. But winter, when it finally comes, is not subtle. It announces itself with cutting winds that howl through the stone corridors, with frost that covers the windows in crystalline patterns, with a penetrating cold that no amount of clothing seems capable of completely ward off. For manuscript monks, winter is the most challenging season. The days are short, terribly short. The sun rises late and sets early, leaving only 6 or 7 hours of usable light, compared with the 15 or 16 hours of summer. This means less time to work, less progress, fewer pages completed. Scriptorium productivity drops dramatically. A manuscript that could be completed in 6 months in summer might take an entire year if the main work happens during winter. But the reduced light is only part of the problem. The cold is equally challenging. The scriptorium, with its large windows designed to maximize light, is impossible to heat adequately. Fireplaces are dangerous near dry parchment and flammable ink. Braziers, metal containers filled with glowing coals, provide some heat, but not much, and the risk of fire means they are used with extreme caution. Most scriptoria simply have no heating at all. The indoor temperature is only marginally higher than the outdoor temperature. Have you ever tried to do delicate manual work with hands numb from cold? Manuscript monks did this daily during the winter months. Their hands became so cold they lost sensitivity. Holding the quill became difficult. Controlling the precise movement necessary for quality calligraphy became nearly impossible. The ink, too, behaved differently in the cold. It flowed more slowly, dried irregularly, sometimes froze completely in the pots during the coldest nights. The manuscripts preserve evidence of these struggles. There are marginal notes from copyists bitterly complaining about the cold. Let whoever does not know what it is to write think that it is not labor. Oh, it is labor, hard labor. It tires the eyes, breaks the back, crushes the ribs and stomach, brings pain to the kidneys, and makes the entire body ache. Another note, particularly poignant. I am freezing. The ink is freezing, the day is dark, the parchment is hard, my hand is numb, may God have mercy. These are not abstract complaints, they are descriptions of real physical suffering. And yet the work continued because manuscripts could not wait, knowledge could not wait. If work stopped during the winter months, if copyists simply gave up when conditions became difficult, how many texts would have been lost? How many works of antiquity would have disappeared forever? There is a profound lesson here about persistence, about continuing to work even when conditions are miserable, even when every instinct says to stop, to seek comfort, to wait for better days. Manuscript monks did not have the option to work from home when the weather was bad. They could not postpone deadlines because they were uncomfortable. They simply continued day after day, line after line, preserving knowledge through sheer force of will and commitment to a purpose greater than themselves. Winter also brings other challenges. Humidity is a constant enemy of parchment. In humid climates, parchment absorbs water from the air and becomes soft, wavy, difficult to write on. In very dry climates, it becomes brittle and can crack. Monks must constantly monitor the condition of their materials, adjusting storage, sometimes even taking precious parchments to their cells at night to keep them at more stable temperature. And then there is the darkness. Not just the physical darkness of short days, but a psychological darkness that can set in during long winters. Seasonal affective disorder is not a modern invention. It is a fundamental human response to lack of sunlight. Medieval monks did not have a name for it, but they certainly experienced its effects. The melancholy of winter, the feeling that spring will never come, the weight of constant darkness. How did they deal with it? Through routine mainly, the rigid structure of monastic life, regular prayers, scheduled meals, consistent work, provided a psychological anchor. Even when everything seemed dark and hopeless, there was always the next prayer, the next meal, the next page to be copied. Routine was not just spiritual discipline, it was psychological survival, and there was community. Although monks lived in silence most of the time, they were not alone. They worked side by side in the scriptorium, prayed together in the church, ate together in the refectory. There was comfort in that shared presence, in that shared suffering. Everyone was cold, everyone was tired, everyone was struggling. And somehow, knowing you were not alone made the burden more bearable. Compare this to the isolation many experience today. We may be digitally connected to hundreds or thousands of people, but how many of us truly share physical space with a community committed to a common purpose? How many of us have people around us going through the same struggles, working toward the same goals, offering silent but solid presence? As winter progresses, monks develop strategies for dealing with the cold. Some wear fingerless mittens, allowing the fingers to remain free to hold the quill while the rest of the hand stays covered. Others vigorously rub their hands every few minutes, restoring circulation. Some even develop the habit of breathing on their hands, using the warmth of their breath to temporarily warm their fingers. They are small adaptations, but they make the difference between being able to work and not being able to. And there are moments of unexpected beauty. One morning, after a snowfall, the entire world is covered in white. The light reflected by the snow is brighter than normal, almost blinding. For one day, the scriptorium is flooded with light. Cold light, but abundant. The monks work with renewed energy, taking advantage of this unexpected gift from nature. They complete more pages this day than they managed in the previous week. Or one night, when the full moon shines through the frost-covered windows, creating patterns of light and shadow that transform the familiar cloister into something magical, almost supernatural. The monks walking to Compline, the last prayer of the day, pause for just a moment, only a moment, because the rule of silence and discipline are strict, and look up at the crystalline night sky, at the stars that seem brighter and closer in the cold, clear air of winter. These moments do not erase the difficulties. They do not make the cold less intense or the days less short. But they offer something essential, reminders that there is beauty in the world, that there are reasons to continue, that winter, however long it seems, will eventually give way to spring. And so they continue through December, January, February, the darkest months, the coldest months, line after line, page after page, preserving knowledge through the most hostile season when it would be so easy to simply stop, to wait, to give up. But they do not give up, because the work is greater than comfort. The purpose is greater than difficulty, and the knowledge they are preserving must survive, no matter the cost. How much would you be willing to endure for something you truly believe in? How much cold? How much discomfort? How much sacrifice? The quill moves across the parchment, forming letters with practiced precision. The monk is copying a text by Augustine, The City of God, a massive work that will take months to complete. He is on page 73. He is doing well, maintaining a steady pace, when suddenly his hand trembles. Just a small tremor, perhaps caused by muscle fatigue, perhaps by an involuntary spasm. But it is enough. The quill drags across the parchment, creating a smudge of ink where there should be a perfectly formed letter. The monk stops. His heart sinks. He looks at the error, assessing the damage. It is bad, but not catastrophic. The ink did not penetrate completely through the parchment. It did not spread to other lines. It is contained, localized. It can be corrected, but the correction will be visible. It always is. And this manuscript is destined for the library of an important bishop. It needs to be perfect, or as close to perfect as human hands can achieve. He reaches for his scraping knife, a small, sharp blade curved specifically for this purpose. With extreme care, he begins to scrape the ink from the parchment. The process is delicate. Too much pressure, and he will tear the parchment. Too little pressure, and the ink will not come off completely. He works slowly, methodically, scraping microscopic layers of parchment along with the ink. It takes 15 minutes to completely remove the error. When he finishes, there is a slightly thinner area in the parchment, slightly rougher. He smooths it with pumice stone, carefully polishing until the surface is as uniform as possible. Now he must rewrite the letter. But the parchment, at this point, has been altered. It will not absorb ink in the same way. He must adjust the pressure of his quill, the amount of ink, the angle of application. It is fine craftwork, requiring years of experience. He makes the letter again. It is good, not perfect. If you look closely, you can see that something has been corrected, but good enough, he continues. But now his concentration is broken. He is nervous, hyper-aware of every movement of his hand. And when you are nervous, when you are thinking too much about every action, that is when more errors happen. 3 lines later, he writes the wrong word. Not a smudge this time, but a copying error. His eye skipped a line in the original manuscript, and he copied the wrong word. He realizes it immediately, but the damage is done. More scraping, more correction, more time lost. Errors are inevitable. No matter how skilled the copyist, no matter how careful, errors happen. The mind wanders, the eyes grow tired and skip lines. The hands tremble, ink smudges. It is part of the human condition, which we are fallible. But in work where precision is absolutely critical, where every error can propagate through generations of subsequent copies, human fallibility is a constant source of anxiety. Monasteries developed elaborate systems to minimize errors. In many scriptoria, the process of creating a manuscript involved multiple stages and multiple people. First, a copyist creates the basic text. Then a corrector, usually a more experienced monk, reviews the work, comparing it line by line with the original, marking errors with special symbols. Then the original copyist or another monk makes the corrections. Finally, on important manuscripts, a third reviewer does a final check before the manuscript is considered complete. Even with these systems, errors slip through, and when they do, they can have fascinating consequences. There are famous cases of copying errors that change the meaning of religious texts. One letter switched, one word misread, and suddenly a biblical passage says something slightly different. Modern scholars spend entire careers comparing different manuscripts of the same text, trying to trace how errors propagated, trying to reconstruct what the original text really said. It is a humbling reminder that much of what we consider established knowledge has passed through this fallible process of manual copying. Every ancient text we have is actually a copy of a copy of a copy, each one potentially introducing small errors. It is like the telephone game but played over centuries, with the stakes being the precise preservation of human knowledge. Manuscript monks were painfully aware of this responsibility. Some left prayers in the colophons of their manuscripts, asking forgiveness for any errors they might have made. If you find errors, correct them with charity, and do not condemn the scribe, for the pen is heavy and the work is arduous. Others left warnings for future copyists. Just as the traveler rejoices to see his home, so rejoices the scribe to see the last page. But you who come after, copy with care, do not add errors to mine. There is something touching about these messages across the centuries. A medieval monk, aware of his own imperfections, speaking directly to someone in the future who will work with his manuscript. It is a form of immortality, not through fame or glory, but through work, through contributing to the continuing chain of knowledge preservation. But not all errors are really errors. Sometimes copyists made deliberate changes. They could correct what they perceived as grammatical errors in the original text. They could update archaic language to more modern forms. They could even add their own explanatory notes, which could then be incorporated into the main text by subsequent copyists who did not realize they were later additions. Distinguishing between accidental errors and deliberate changes is one of the great challenges of modern textual criticism. And then there are cases where copyists deliberately altered texts for ideological reasons. A monk who disagreed with a particular theological point could subtly modify the language. A copyist working during a religious controversy could emphasize certain passages and minimize others. These were not errors, they were edits, censorship, propaganda. They remind us that preserving knowledge is never entirely neutral. There are always choices being made about what to preserve, how to preserve it, which interpretation to favor. The monk finishes his correction and continues working, but the incident has left him shaken. He is more tired now, more prone to further errors. It is a vicious cycle. Error leads to stress. Stress leads to more errors. He recognizes this, tries to calm himself through silent prayer. Lord, guide my hand, keep my mind focused. Allow this work to be worthy of your name. The pursuit of perfection in an imperfect world. It is a struggle that resonates across the centuries. How many of us in our own work struggle with this same tension? We want to do everything perfectly, but we are human, fallible, limited. We make mistakes, and then we must decide how do we respond to these errors, with despair, with denial, or with patient determination to correct them and move forward. The manuscript monks chose to continue. They developed tools and techniques for correction. They created systems of review. They cultivated the virtues of patience and humility. And perhaps most importantly, they developed the ability to forgive themselves for their imperfections while still striving for excellence. There is wisdom in this. Perfection may be the goal, but persistence is the virtue that truly matters. Not giving up when you make an error. Not letting the fear of imperfection paralyze you. Simply continuing, doing the best you can, correcting when necessary, and trusting that the cumulative effort of many imperfect people can, over time, create something extraordinary. The bell rings, it is time for none, the prayer of the 9th hour. The monk cleans his quill, caps his ink pot, and stands. His errors today trouble him, but they do not define him. Tomorrow he will return. Tomorrow he will try again. And slowly, line by line, page by page, the manuscript will grow toward completion. Not perfectly, but persistently. And in the end, perhaps that is what matters most. There is a room in the monastery that is more sacred than any other, except perhaps the church itself. It is a room where silence is not just a rule, but an absolute necessity. Where light is carefully controlled, where temperature and humidity are monitored with obsessive attention, where every object is treated with reverence that borders on the religious. This room is the library, the intellectual heart of the monastery, the repository of centuries of accumulated knowledge, the most valuable treasure the community possesses. The library of a great medieval monastery is different from any library you would visit today. There are no open shelves where you can browse freely. There is no casual lending system. There are no comfortable tables where you can sit and read for hours. Instead, there are heavy oak cabinets, many with locked doors. There are reinforced chests bound with iron. And, most characteristically, there are chains. Iron chains binding the most valuable books to shelves or special bars, ensuring they can never be removed from the room. Why chains? Because a single manuscript is worth more than the annual income of a prosperous farm. Because books are stolen regularly, but not by common thieves, but by desperate scholars, by wealthy collectors, by other monasteries that covet particular volumes. Because the loss of a unique manuscript can mean the permanent loss of knowledge that exists nowhere else in the world. The chains are not insults, they are practical necessities in an age where books are literally irreplaceable. The librarian of the monastery, the armarius, as he is called in Latin, is one of the most important and respected positions in the community. He is responsible not just for cataloguing and organizing manuscripts, but for preserving them, for deciding who can access them, for overseeing their maintenance and repair. It is work that requires deep knowledge not only of texts and authors, but of material conservation, of basic chemistry, of how to protect parchment and ink against the invisible enemies of deterioration, because books have enemies, many enemies. Humidity makes parchment moldy, staining pages with green and black growths that can render the text illegible. Excessive dryness makes parchment brittle and crack. Direct sunlight fades inks, especially organic pigments. Insects, especially moths and silverfish, eat parchment and glue. Rats gnaw at the edges of books, and, more devastating than anything, there is fire. A single fire can destroy in hours what took centuries to accumulate. The librarian fights these enemies with constant vigilance. The library is kept dark. Windows are small and often covered with heavy curtains. It is kept cool. There are never fires or braziers here, no matter how cold it gets in winter. It is kept dry, but not excessively. Small containers of water are sometimes placed strategically to maintain minimal humidity. It is inspected regularly for signs of insect infestation, and it is locked when not in use, accessible only to the librarian and a few trusted senior monks. Entering the library is to enter a different kind of space. The air smells different. There is the aroma of old parchment, of leather, of ink, of oak wood, all mixed together in a unique perfume that any medieval scholar would recognize instantly. The light is dim, filtered, creating an atmosphere of perpetual twilight. And there is a special acoustic quality, and the silence here is deeper, more complete, as if the books themselves absorb sound. The manuscripts are organized according to systems that vary from monastery to monastery. Some organized by author, others by subject, biblical texts together, works of the church fathers together, classical authors together, medical and scientific texts together. Some of the more sophisticated monasteries maintain written catalogues, listing each volume with detailed descriptions, title, author, number of pages, physical condition, location in the library. These catalogues are themselves valuable manuscripts, carefully maintained and updated. To leaf through one of these medieval catalogues is a fascinating and sometimes heartbreaking experience. They list books that no longer exist, works by ancient authors that we know existed only because a medieval catalogue mentions them, but whose text has been completely lost. Imagine knowing that something existed, that it was carefully preserved for centuries, but that at some point, perhaps during the Reformation, when many monasteries were dissolved, perhaps during wars, perhaps simply through neglect, it disappeared forever. How many texts were lost? How many works of philosophy, science, literature, history simply no longer exist? Scholars estimate that we have only a fraction, perhaps 10%, the texts that existed in classical antiquity. The rest disappeared, and most of what survived only survived because medieval monks working in libraries like this one decided it was worth preserving. Think about the choices that involved. Parchment was expensive, copyist time was limited. Not everything could be preserved. So decisions had to be made. Is this text important enough to copy? Does this author deserve to be preserved? Does this knowledge have value for future generations? These decisions, made by medieval librarians, whose names we usually do not know, fundamentally shaped which knowledge from the ancient world reached us. And they did not always choose what modern scholars wish they had chosen. Religious texts were prioritized over secular texts. Christian authors were copied more frequently than pagan authors. Works that supported church doctrine were preserved. Works that questioned it sometimes disappeared. It was not deliberate censorship in most cases. It was simply that limited resources were directed toward what the community considered most important. But here is something remarkable. Even with these priorities, even in a deeply religious age, medieval monks still preserved a surprising amount of pagan, secular, even heretical texts. They copied Aristotle, though his philosophy sometimes conflicted with Christian doctrine. They preserved Ovid, whose works were often sexually explicit. They kept texts of Arab medicine, Greek mathematics, Persian astronomy. Why? Because at some level they understood that knowledge has intrinsic value, that destroying knowledge, even knowledge with which you disagree, is a sin against humanity. Compare this to our digital age. We have virtually unlimited storage capacity. We can preserve everything. And yet, how much knowledge is being lost? How many websites disappear when companies close? How many posts, articles, discussions are deleted and lost forever? How many entire platforms, with all the content they contained, simply cease to exist? The memory of the internet is much more fragile than we imagine. Medieval monks, with their durable physical materials, created records that survived 800 years. How many of our digital records will survive 800 years? How many will survive 80? We have the technology to preserve everything, but we do not have the systems, the discipline, the institutional commitment that medieval monasteries had. It is a profound irony. The librarian is doing his daily rounds now, inspecting each section of the library. He checks for signs of moisture, insects, any damage. He notices that one particular manuscript seems to be developing spots, the beginning of mold. He carefully removes it, takes it to a drier area, plans to monitor it closely. Another manuscript has a loose page. The stitching is coming undone. He makes a mental note to repair it soon, before the page is completely lost. This work of conservation is endless. Books, even when carefully maintained, deteriorate. It is the nature of organic materials. Parchment eventually breaks down. Ink eventually fades. Stitching eventually comes undone. Preserving a library is not a single project. It is a perpetual commitment, a constant battle against entropy, against the natural tendency of all things to fall apart over time. And yet they persist. Generation after generation of librarians, each passing knowledge and responsibility to the next, each adding new manuscripts to the collection, each repairing the old ones, each maintaining the unbroken chain of preservation that connects the distant past to the distant future. As the librarian completes his inspection, he pauses before one particular manuscript. A copy of Augustine that is 300 years old, copied by monks whose names were forgotten long ago. He opens it carefully, looks at the handwriting still clear, the illuminations still vibrant. 300 years and still readable, still beautiful, still serving its purpose. How much of what we create today will still be useful, still be beautiful, still have purpose 300 years from now? The bell rings for Vespers, the second to last prayer of the day, when the sun is beginning its final descent toward the horizon. The monks leave their work, the scriptorium, the library, the gardens, the kitchen, wherever their tasks have taken them, and converge on the church. They walk in silence as always, but there is something different in the quality of that silence now. It is not the tense silence of deep concentration, nor the heavy silence of fatigue. It is a softer silence, almost anticipatory. The workday is almost over. Night approaches, bringing rest. They take their places on the familiar benches. Each monk has his designated place, determined by seniority and position in the monastery's hierarchy. The abbot in front, the oldest monks close to him, the youngest in back. It is an order that reflects the structure of all monastic life. Everything has its place, its purpose, its appropriate position in the divine order of things. There is no democracy here, but neither is there ambiguity. Everyone knows where they belong. The chanting begins. Voices rise in unison, following melodies that have been sung in this same space for generations. There is something profoundly comforting in this continuity. The monks who sang these same words 100 years ago are long dead, but the song continues. The monks who will sing these words 100 years in the future have not yet been born, but they will sing the same melodies. The song is greater than any individual, greater than any generation. It is an unbroken chain connecting past, present, and future. But here is something fascinating. Although the monks live in silence most of the time, although they rarely converse or interact in ways we would recognize as social, they are not isolated. They live in deep community, they share space, work, purpose. They know one another in ways that go beyond words. Through gestures, through physical presence, through the shared experience of living the same rigorous routine day after day. Think about it. In our era of constant communication, where we can send instant messages to anyone at any time, where we are always digitally connected, how many of us really experience deep community? How many of us have people with whom we share common purpose, with whom we work side by side towards shared goals, whose physical presence is a constant part of our lives? Medieval monks, in their silence, may have had something that many of us have lost, a sense of genuine belonging, of being part of something greater than oneself. The monastic community functions through a complex system of roles and responsibilities. There is the abbot, the spiritual and administrative leader. There is the prior, his second in command. There is the master of the scriptorium, the librarian, the sacristan, responsible for the church and its sacred objects. The cellarer, responsible for supplies and finances. The infirmarian, caring for the sick. The porter, dealing with visitors and the outside world. Each role is essential, each person contributes to the functioning of the whole. And then there are the copyists whose work we have been following. They are not the elite of the community, a place belongs to the older monks, the theologians, the administrators, but neither are they the lowest. There are younger monks, novices, lay brothers who do heavier manual labor. The copyists occupy a middle space respected for their skills, essential to the monastery's mission, but still part of the larger hierarchical structure. There are tensions, of course. Any community of humans has tensions. There are personalities that clash. There are resentments about work assignments. There is jealousy when one monk is chosen for a prestigious project and another is not. There is frustration when someone is not pulling their weight, when someone is breaking rules, when someone is receiving special treatment. All the normal dynamics of any workplace, any family, any group of people living in close proximity. But there are mechanisms for dealing with these tensions. There is the chapter, a regular meeting where monks can confess failures, where disputes can be resolved, where the abbot can address problems. There is the system of penances for rule breaking, not cruel punishments, but acts of humility meant to restore the community's harmony. There is, above all, the structure of the monastic rule, which provides clear guidelines for nearly every situation, reducing ambiguity and conflict. And there is shared prayer. 7 times a day, every day, the entire community gathers. No matter what disputes exist, what tensions are simmering, what resentments are growing. When the bell rings, everyone comes, everyone stands side by side, everyone sings the same words. It is a powerful way to continually reaffirm shared identity, common purpose, unity that transcends individual differences. Is there something that our modern society, with its intense focus on individualism, can learn here? I am not suggesting everyone should live in monasteries or adopt strict silence, but there is value in shared rituals, in common purposes, in structures that regularly bring people together and remind them they are part of something greater than themselves. Many of modern society's ills, loneliness, lack of meaning, anxiety, may be related to the loss of these types of community structures. Vespers ends. The monks stand and head to the refectory for the last meal of the day. It is even simpler than the midday meal. Just bread and soup, perhaps a bit of fruit. They eat quickly, in silence, while the reading continues. Then there is a brief period of free time, perhaps 30 minutes, before compline, the final prayer of the day. This is one of the few times when the rule of silence is slightly relaxed. The monks may converse briefly, though they are still expected to keep their voices low and discuss only necessary matters. Some use this time to resolve practical issues, coordinating work for the next day, borrowing materials, reporting problems that need attention. Others simply walk through the cloister, enjoying the last rays of sun, the cool night air. There are friendships here, though they are different from the friendships we know. There are no long conversations, no intimate confidences, no casual socializing. But there are deep connections formed through years of working side by side, of shared suffering, of common purpose. 2 monks who have worked in the scriptorium together for decades know one another in profound ways. They know each other's work rhythms, struggles, strengths, habits. They can communicate with a look, a gesture, an inclination of the head, and there is mentorship. Older, more experienced monks guide the younger ones, not through formal instruction, though there is some of that, but through example, through presence, through gentle correction when needed. A young copyist struggling with a particular technique may find an older monk silently demonstrating the correct method. A monk discouraged by repeated errors may receive a nod of encouragement, a brief touch on the shoulder, a silent reminder that everyone struggles, everyone makes mistakes, everyone needs patience with themselves. These small kindnesses, these small human connections within the rigid structure of monastic life are what make it all bearable. Without them, the routine would be overwhelming, the discipline would be unbearable, the isolation would be destructive. But with them, there is warmth, there is humanity, there are reminders that you are not alone, that others care, that you are part of a community that values you not for your accomplishments, but simply because you belong. The bell rings for compline. The sun has set completely now. Night has arrived. The monks gather in the church one last time. Compline is brief, quiet, designed to prepare the mind for sleep. The chants are softer, slower. The prayers speak of protection through the night, of rest for the weary body, of trust in God through the hours of darkness. When Compline ends, the great silence begins. From the end of Compline until after Lauds the next morning, no word shall be spoken except in absolute emergency. It is the deepest silence of the day, the silence of night, when even gestures are minimized, when the community withdraws into itself, when each monk is alone with his thoughts, his prayers, his God. They walk to their cells in complete silence. There are no electric lights to turn on, no elaborate nighttime routines. They simply lie down on their straw mats, pull their wool blankets over themselves, and close their eyes. Tomorrow the bell will ring again at 2 in the morning. Tomorrow everything will begin again. But for now, there is rest. There is darkness. There is silence. And in that silence, there is peace. Not the peace of the absence of problems, but the peace of knowing your place, your purpose, your community. The peace of belonging. Months have passed since this particular manuscript was begun. Perhaps 6 months, perhaps 8. Time becomes blurred when each day follows the same pattern, when there are no external landmarks to measure progress except the slow accumulation of completed pages. But now, finally, the end is in sight. The manuscript copyist is on the last pages. He can see the end of the original text he is copying. A few more days, perhaps a week, and it will be finished. There is a strange mixture of emotions in this moment. Relief, certainly. Oh, this project has consumed months of his life, and he is eager to see it complete. Pride. He has done good work, he knows that. The pages are clean, the calligraphy is consistent, the errors have been minimal and well corrected. This manuscript will serve its purpose well, wherever it ends up. But there is also a pang of sadness. He has spent so much time with this text, these words, these pages. It has become familiar, almost comforting in its routine. And when it is finished, there will be a new project, a new text, a new beginning. He writes the final line, then, following tradition, he adds a colophon, a note at the end of the manuscript recording information about its creation. Some colophons are elaborate, including the copyist's name, the date, the location, even comments about working conditions. Others are simple. This monk chooses something in between. Here ends this book. It was completed in the year of our Lord 1247 in the monastery of Name by the hand of an unworthy servant of God. May he who reads it pray for the soul of the scribe. Thanks be to God. It is a statement of humility, unworthy servant, but also a claim to immortality. Centuries in the future, someone reading this manuscript will know that he existed, that he worked, that he contributed to the preservation of this knowledge. His name may be forgotten, but his work will remain. He closes the manuscript carefully and takes it to the master of the scriptorium for final inspection. The master examines it thoroughly, checking the quality of the calligraphy, the accuracy of the text, the condition of the parchment. He finds a few minor errors, a misformed letter here, slightly irregular, spacing there, but nothing serious. He nods in approval. The manuscript is acceptable, but the work is not yet complete. The manuscript now needs to be bound. The individual parchment pages need to be sewn together into gatherings. The gatherings need to be sewn into a book structure, and then covers need to be added. Binding is a specialized skill usually performed by a different monk who dedicates himself specifically to this craft. The binder works in a separate workshop filled with specialized tools. There are thick needles for sewing parchment. There are wooden presses to keep pages flat while being sewn. There is glue made from boiled animal skin. There is leather for the covers, usually calf or pig skin, tanned and dyed. And for particularly important manuscripts, there are decorative materials, metal plates, sometimes silver or even gold, to be fixed to the covers, precious or semi-precious stones to be set, tools to engrave elaborate patterns in the leather. The binding process takes days. First, the pages are arranged in the correct order and checked again. Then they are folded and grouped into gatherings, usually 4 sheets folded together, creating 8 pages. The gatherings are then sewn together through their folds, creating a flexible but durable structure. Strips of parchment or leather are added along the spine for reinforcement. Then the covers are prepared. Wooden boards covered with leather, with metal clasps to keep the book closed. Important because parchment tends to warp and open if not kept under pressure. For a common manuscript, the binding is functional but simple. For an important manuscript, even like this one, destined for a bishop's library, the binding is itself a work of art. The binder engraves elaborate patterns in the leather of the covers. He adds decorative metal plates at the corners and center. He may even add a small precious stone, perhaps an amethyst or a topaz, set in the center of the front cover. The result is an object of impressive beauty, worthy of the content it protects. When the binding is complete, the manuscript is taken to the abbot for blessing. This is not mere formality. The abbot opens the book, examines it, reads random passages checking for accuracy and quality. Then, if satisfied, he performs a brief blessing ceremony, asking God to protect this book, to allow it to serve its purpose, to ensure that the knowledge it contains be used for good. And then, finally, the manuscript is complete. Months of work by multiple people, the copyist, the illuminator, the corrector, the binder, culminate in this single object. It is recorded in the library's catalogue. If it is destined to remain in the monastery, it is placed in its proper place on the shelves, perhaps chained if it is particularly valuable. If it is destined elsewhere, as this one is, going to a bishop, it is carefully packed for travel, wrapped in cloth, placed in a leather case, prepared for the journey. There is a ceremony when important manuscripts leave the monastery. The community gathers. The abbot presents the manuscript to the messenger who will carry it, offering prayers for safe travel. The monks who worked on it, especially the main copyist, have a moment of silent farewell. They have poured months of their lives into this object. Now it goes out into the world to serve purposes they may never know, to be read by people they will never meet. It is an act of faith, really. You work for months creating something and then you let it go, trusting that it will serve its purpose, that it will make a difference, that the knowledge it contains will be valued and used. You may never know if it made a difference. You may never receive feedback, never hear whether the bishop was satisfied, never know whether the manuscript was read and appreciated or simply placed on a shelf and forgotten. But you do the work anyway, because the work itself has value. Because preserving knowledge is important regardless of immediate recognition, because you are part of a chain that extends through the centuries. Monks before you preserved knowledge that you now use. You preserve knowledge that monks after you will use. You are a link in that chain, and that is enough. The messenger departs with the manuscript. The copyist returns to the scriptorium. There is already a new project waiting. Another text to be copied, another manuscript to be created. The work never really ends. There is always more knowledge to preserve, more texts to copy, more contributions to make to the great work of keeping the light of learning alive through the centuries. He sits at his familiar table. He picks up a new sheet of parchment, smooth and white, full of possibilities. He dips his quill in the ink. And he begins again. The first line of a new manuscript. The first word of a new journey. And as his quill touches the parchment, he carries a question. This work I am beginning now, where will it end? Who will read it? What difference will it make? He cannot know, but he trusts. And he continues, because that is what we do. We create, we preserve, we contribute, and we trust that somehow, in some way, it matters. 800 years have passed since that manuscript copyist monk completed his work. 800 years of history. Wars, plagues, revolutions, technological transformations that would have been incomprehensible to him. The monastery where he worked may still stand, or it may have been dissolved during the Reformation, its stones scattered, its monks expelled. The library he helped build may have survived, or it may have been destroyed in a fire, in war, through simple neglect. But some of the manuscripts survived, not all. Many were lost, and each loss is a tragedy. But some. And these survivors now reside in modern libraries, in museums, in special collections of universities. They are studied by scholars, digitized for preservation, occasionally displayed in exhibitions where people can see them through protective glass, marveling at the beauty of the calligraphy, at the shine of gold in the illuminations, at the simple fact that something created so many centuries ago still exists. When you look at one of these medieval manuscripts, and if you have the opportunity, you should, you are looking through time in a very direct way. You are seeing exactly what that monk saw when he completed his work. The same letters his hand formed, the same colors he mixed and applied, the same words he read and copied. It is a tangible connection across the centuries, a literal touch of the past. And if you look closely, you can see evidence of his humanity. Perhaps a small smudge where he blurred the ink, perhaps a correction where he scraped away an error, perhaps a marginal note where he expressed frustration with the cold or relief at completing a difficult section. These small imperfections, these small windows into his experience, make him real in a way that abstract historical facts never could. He was a real person. He had hands that ached, eyes that grew tired, a mind that sometimes wandered. He had hopes and fears, moments of pride and moments of doubt. He lived a life of extraordinary discipline and sacrifice, dedicated to a purpose he believed was greater than himself. And through his work, through the manuscripts he created, he achieved a form of immortality. Not the immortality of fame. We do not know his name, and probably never will. But the immortality of contribution. He helped preserve knowledge that would otherwise have been lost. He was a link in the chain that connects the ancient world to the modern world. Without him, and thousands like him, much of what we know about Greek philosophy, Roman history, medieval science, Christian theology, simply would not exist. Think about the responsibility he carried. Think about the pressure of knowing that if you did not copy this text, if you did not preserve this knowledge, it could be lost forever. And then think about the fact that he did it anyway, day after day, year after year, through cold and heat, through pain and fatigue. He continued. He and his brother monks kept the light of learning alive through the centuries we call the Middle Ages. Centuries that were not so dark as we sometimes imagine, precisely because people like him were quietly working to preserve and transmit knowledge. But here is an uncomfortable question. What are we preserving? What are we transmitting to future generations? We have technology that medieval monks could not have imagined. We have virtually unlimited storage capacity. We can copy texts instantly, perfectly, without error. We can distribute knowledge globally in seconds. And yet, how much of what we create will have lasting value? How much will survive for 800 years? Medieval monks were selective by necessity. They had to choose what to preserve because they could not preserve everything. We have the opposite. We can preserve everything, so we preserve everything, every random thought, every photo, every message, every post. But preservation without curation is just accumulation. It is noise, and in the noise, important signals can be lost. Perhaps there is something to learn from the medieval approach. Not that we should go back to copying manuscripts by hand, that would be absurd, but perhaps we should think more carefully about what is worth preserving, what is worth transmitting, what knowledge has lasting value. Perhaps we should be more intentional about our intellectual heritage, more deliberate about what we leave behind. And there is another lesson, the importance of slow, careful, dedicated work. Manuscript copyists could not do their work quickly. The nature of the work demanded patience, attention to detail, willingness to spend months or years on a single project. In our age of instant gratification, of 24-hour news cycles, of viral content that appears and disappears in days, there is something profoundly countercultural about work that takes months or years to complete. But it is that kind of work, slow, careful, dedicated, that tends to have lasting impact. Medieval manuscripts survived for centuries precisely because they were created with such care, with such durable materials, with such meticulous attention to detail. How much of the content we create today, created quickly and consumed quickly, will survive for centuries? How much will even survive for decades? There is also a lesson about purpose. Manuscript copyists had a clear sense of why they were doing what they did. They were serving God, preserving His Word, contributing to their community's mission. That sense of purpose sustained them through difficulties that would otherwise have been unbearable. How many of us, in our modern work, have that kind of clarity of purpose? How many of us feel that our daily work contributes to something greater than ourselves? I am not romanticizing medieval life. It was harsh, often brutal, limited in ways that would be foolish to wish back. But there were aspects of it, the sense of community, the clarity of purpose, the willingness to dedicate years to work that may never bring personal recognition, that our age could benefit from reconsidering. The sun is setting over the monastery, no, not the medieval monastery of our story, but a modern monastery, one of the few where monks still occasionally copy manuscripts, not by necessity, but as art, as meditation, as connection to tradition. A young monk is sitting in a scriptorium, quill in hand, copying a text. He knows his work is not necessary. The text he is copying is available in millions of printed copies, is online, is in e-books. But he copies anyway. Why? Because there is value in the process itself. Because copying a text by hand, letter by letter, word by word, makes you understand it in a way that quick reading never could. Because there is something meditative, almost sacred, in the act of slow, careful creation. Because he is connecting himself to a tradition that stretches through the centuries, becoming part of a story larger than himself. And as his quill moves across the parchment, he carries the same question that monks have carried for centuries. Does this work I am doing, this contribution I am making, matter? Will it make a difference? Will it be remembered? He cannot know. None of us can. But he continues anyway, because some things are worth doing regardless of recognition. Because preserving knowledge, creating beauty, contributing to something greater than yourself, these things have intrinsic value regardless of outcome. And perhaps that is the final lesson of the medieval manuscript monks. Do the work. Do it well. Do it with care and dedication. And trust that somehow, in some way, through paths you may never see, it will matter, because it does matter. It always has, and it always will. The candle burns low in the monk's cell. It is late, well after Compline, well into the great silence. He should be sleeping, recovering strength for the matins bell that will ring in a few hours. But tonight he cannot sleep. His mind is restless, turning over questions that have no easy answers. He has spent decades in this monastery, decades copying manuscripts, preserving texts, contributing to the great work of keeping knowledge alive through the centuries. How many manuscripts has he completed? He has lost count. 50? 100? Each one representing months of work, thousands of hours bent over parchment, millions of letters formed by his hand. And for what? Where are those manuscripts now? Some are in the monastery library, he knows. Others were sent to other monasteries, to bishops, to nascent universities. But he never saw them again. Never knew if they were read, if they were appreciated, if they made any difference. He worked in faith, trusting that his work had purpose, but without ever having confirmation. That is true for most of us, is it not? We do our work, we make our contributions, and rarely do we see the full impact. A teacher teaches thousands of students over a career, but may never know which lessons truly stuck, which students were truly impacted. A writer publishes books that may touch lives, but most readers never make contact. A scientist contributes to a body of knowledge that others will build upon, but may never see the final result. We work in faith. We do what we believe is important, what we believe has value, and we trust that somehow, in some way, it will matter. It is all we can do, and perhaps it is enough. The monk thinks about the texts he copied. Some were religious, Bibles, lives of saints, theological treatises. Those were easy to justify. They directly served the Church's mission, supported the faith, guided souls, but others were secular. Greek philosophy, Roman history, medical texts, even poetry, that was sometimes questionable in its content. Why did he spend precious time copying those? Why did the monastery dedicate resources to preserving knowledge that was not directly religious? Because knowledge has intrinsic value. Because truth, wherever it is found, comes from God. Because destroying knowledge, even knowledge with which you disagree, is a sin against creation. These were the justifications he learned, that he accepted, that he internalized over the years. But there is something more, something he is only beginning to articulate even to himself. There is value not just in the knowledge preserved, but in the act of preservation itself. There is something profoundly human, profoundly important about caring enough about the past to work, to transmit it to the future. About recognizing that you are part of a chain that extends through time, connecting generations that will never meet. We are all, every one of us, links in chains. We receive knowledge, culture, tradition from those who came before. We add our own contributions, however small they may be, and we pass them forward to those who come after. That is the fundamental human condition. We are temporal creatures living in a specific moment, but connected to a flow that is vastly greater than our individual lives. Manuscript monks understood this in a way that our age, with its focus on the immediate present, sometimes forgets. They lived with acute awareness of both the past and the future. The past was present in every ancient text they copied, every word from authors dead for centuries. The future was present in every manuscript they created, destined to be read by people not yet born. They lived in the intersection of past and future, serving as a bridge between eras. There is something profoundly significant about that role. It is not glamorous, it brings no fame or fortune, but it is essential. Civilization depends on people willing to do this work of transmission, of preservation, of maintaining connections across time. Without them, each generation would have to start from zero, reinvent everything, relearn lessons that have already been learned. Progress would be impossible. The monk thinks about the sacrifices he has made. He never married, never had children, never had a home of his own. He lived in poverty, in frequent discomfort, in rigorous discipline. He spent decades doing repetitive work that was often physically painful. Was it worth it? Did he make the right choice? He does not know. Honestly, he does not know. There are moments, many moments, when he wonders what his life could have been if he had made different choices. But then he thinks about the manuscripts, thinks about the knowledge preserved, thinks about being part of something greater than himself, something that will continue long after he is gone. And he decides once more that yes, it was worth it. Not because he is special, not because his work is more important than other work, but because he found purpose. He found a way to contribute, and in the end, perhaps that is what we all seek, a way to make our life mean something, to leave the world a little better than we found it, to be part of something that endures. There are many ways to do this. You do not need to be a manuscript monk. You do not need to dedicate your life to preserving ancient manuscripts. But you do need to find your purpose, your contribution, your way of being a link in the chain that connects past and future. Perhaps it is through teaching, passing knowledge to the next generation. Perhaps it is through creating art, music, literature, science, adding something new to humanity's treasure. Perhaps it is through simply living with integrity, treating others with kindness, doing your work well, being a positive presence in the world. What matters is not the greatness of the contribution, but the sincerity of it. Manuscript monks were not geniuses, they were not saints. They were ordinary people doing ordinary work, but doing it with dedication, with care, with commitment to something greater than themselves. And through that ordinary work, they achieved something extraordinary. The candle is almost burned down now. The monk knows he must sleep. The bell will ring soon, and the cycle will begin again. More prayers, more work. More pages to be copied. More knowledge to be preserved. It is a life of routine, of repetition, of discipline. But it is also a life of purpose, of meaning, of contribution. He lies down on his straw mat. He closes his eyes, and as he drifts towards sleep, he carries one final question. Not to himself this time, but to you, reader, in the distant future. What are you preserving? What are you transmitting? What link are you in the chain that connects past and future? What contribution are you making, however small, to humanity's common treasure? You do not need to have answers now, but carry the questions. Let them work in you, because in the end, these are the questions that shape a life of meaning. And perhaps, just perhaps, 800 years from now, someone will look back and see your contribution, your part in the great chain, and be grateful. Just as we are grateful now for the manuscript monks who worked in silence through the centuries, preserving the light of knowledge through the dark ages, they did their part. Now it is our turn. What will we do with it?